I was sitting in my truck on level 3 of a parking garage in Columbus, Ohio, watching the entrance of a Hyatt Regency I had no business being at on a Thursday morning in October. 2 hours from home. My coffee was cold in the cup holder. My wife's silver Acura was in the self-park lot on the east side of the building, and the black G-Wagon 2 spots down belonged to a man I'd shaken hands with exactly once. I sat there for 20 minutes. Then I drove home. I want to be clear about who I was before all this. I'm a civil engineer. I run a small structural inspection firm out of Cincinnati. 11 employees, city contracts, bridge work, commercial buildings, nothing that makes the news. I turned 46 in March of that year. My wife took me to the Italian place on Hyde Park Square, and we split a bottle of Barolo, and she laughed at something I said, and I drove home thinking we were doing fine. I genuinely thought that. That's the part I keep coming back to. We'd been married 16 years. No kids at home anymore. Both in college by then, gone in the way that leaves the house strange and quiet. My wife was the director of client relations at a mid-sized commercial car firm downtown. She was good at her job. I was proud of her. I told her that, though not always as often as I should have. We ate dinner together 4 nights a week. We had a routine, and I had confused routine with contentment, and I would spend a long time after everything happened thinking about the difference between those two things. The calendar invite arrived on a Wednesday morning in mid-September at 6:48 a.m. My wife and I have always shared an email domain, something we set up years ago for the kids' school calendar, joint subscriptions, shared accounts. Our addresses are almost identical. Mine is 1 letter shorter than hers. Thad Orwell's assistant sent a hotel confirmation to the wrong one. Regency Columbus. Suite 1104, October 3 to 5. 2 nights. Booked under Mr. and Mrs. T. Orwell. Per Mona's preference. King bed, high floor, quiet side of building. I read it 3 times before the coffee I was holding got cold in my hand. After the invite, I sat down at my wife's laptop. She'd left it open on the kitchen counter, logged into her work email. I had never done that before. Not once, but I did it that morning, and what I found was 7 months of a life running parallel to mine, in the same house under the same roof, quiet and steady as a fracture in a beam you haven't inspected yet. I read for 3 hours without moving from that chair. Thad Orwell was a real estate developer, 54 years old, silver hair swept back, face on bus benches near the interstate. His firm was one of my wife's biggest accounts. She'd been managing his PR for nearly 2 years. Press releases, community outreach for new developments, the kind of work that puts you in close contact with someone regularly enough that you start to know them. She'd mentioned him at dinner probably a dozen times. How driven he was. How he thought differently than most of the clients she handled. I'd met him once at a firm event, introduced myself, and watched his eyes move past my left shoulder the entire time we were talking. The messages went back to February. Valentine's Day weekend, when I'd worked a Saturday to finish a report for a city deadline, and she'd told me she was going to spend the day with her friend from college. I'd bought her flowers and left them on the counter with a note. She'd sent Thad a photo of her hotel room in Nashville. I was thorough. I read everything. Call it masochism. Call it the instinct of a man who has spent his career identifying exactly how much damage has been done before he makes any decisions about repair. What broke me open wasn't the hotel receipts. It wasn't even the photographs. It was the way she talked about me in the spaces between. Thad asked her one night, "What's on your mind?" She wrote back, "Honestly, sitting at dinner with Aaron and trying to remember why I married him. He spent 20 minutes tonight explaining to me why a specific bolt specification matters on a pedestrian bridge. He means well. He's just so small, not in a cruel way, just in the way of a man whose world has exactly the dimensions he chose for it, and he's completely okay with that." Thad replied, "You deserve someone who reaches for more." She wrote back, "I know, I've known it for a while." I closed the laptop and sat in the kitchen and looked at the wall for a long time. Then I went to my truck. Here is what I did not do. I did not call her. I did not drive to Thad Orwell's office. I did not make a scene. I thought about all of those things in the 15 minutes I sat in the driveway, and then I backed out and drove to a coffee shop on Montgomery Road and ordered something I didn't drink and sat by the window. I'm an engineer. When something fails, you identify the full extent of the damage before you start making moves. Emotional reactions are for people who don't need the fix to last. I gave myself 10 days. I used those days well. I copied the email records to a drive I kept at my office. I cross-referenced the hotel receipts in his messages against the dates she'd told me she was working late, or traveling for client meetings, or out with friends. 43 overnight stays in 14 months. 14 of them on dates when I had believed her completely. I documented everything with the same method I use on inspection reports. Dates, times, documentation source, corroborating evidence. When you're going to make a structural argument, you build it so nobody can pull a single piece without the rest remaining intact. Then I looked up Joan Orwell. LinkedIn showed me a family law attorney with her own firm downtown. 10 years of practice, high-asset divorce cases. Her professional photo had a composed, measured look to it, the kind that comes from having heard most of what people are capable of. I found her firm's number on a Monday morning and called from my work phone. She picked up on the second ring. I said, "My name is Aaron. I believe our spouses are involved with each other." A pause, not a surprised pause. A pause like someone setting something down carefully before they speak. Then, "I've known for 3 months. I've been waiting for the phone to ring." We met at a coffee shop in Blue Ash, far enough from both our usual orbits. She was smaller than her photo suggested, early 50s, dark hair going silver at the temples. She came in with a leather portfolio and set an untouched coffee in front of her and looked at me the way people look at someone they're deciding whether to trust. "How long?" she asked. 7 months documented. Could be longer. She nodded. "He's done this twice before. Once in Nashville, once with a woman from his investor group. Both times he paid his way out before it could become public. Thad operates on the assumption that money is a complete solution." She opened the portfolio. "I've been quietly pulling financial records for 3 months. What I don't have is documentation of the affair itself that exists outside our shared accounts. Something that could stand independently. I have his emails, her work account, hotel confirmations, messages, photographs." She looked at me steadily. "How much of it is documented?" "All of it." She almost smiled. "Then I think we can help each other." We met 4 more times over the following 10 days. What emerged from those meetings was a picture of a pattern, not just an affair. Thad had been charging hotel stays, dinners, traveled his development firm's expense accounts for years. He'd filed it under client entertainment. He'd done it in Nashville and gotten away with it. He was doing it again, and the paper trail Joan had access to matched the receipts in my wife's emails with a precision that would survive any scrutiny. Joan knew 2 institutional investors who had money in Thad's current developments. She knew the regional bank that held his construction loans. She knew the commercial partner in Nashville who'd worked with him for 15 years and didn't know about the first situation because Thad had been careful about what he told people. "We're not going to do anything illegal," she told me one evening. "We don't need to. Everything we have is documented, sourced, and accurate. That's the advantage of dealing with an arrogant man. He didn't think anyone would look." I went home on a Friday evening and found my wife in the kitchen making pasta, wine glass on the counter, radio playing. She smiled when I walked in and said she was making the one with the lemon cream sauce because she knew I liked it. 16 years. She was so easy in the lie by then, so thoroughly settled into its shape. I sat down at the table. "Tell me about Thad Orwell," I said. She didn't turn around immediately. I watched her shoulders do something. A quiet tightening 1 degree. "What about him?" She kept her hands moving at the stove. "Mona, put the spoon down." She turned. Her face was composed in the specific way of someone who has rehearsed a version of this moment. She began with the reasonable explanation, close working relationship, demanding project. She'd been distracted. She knew she'd been pulling away and she was sorry for that. I put my phone on the table. On the screen was a photograph of her email from a Tuesday in April. "I keep checking the time at dinner with him and waiting for it to be over. Is that terrible? Tell me that's not terrible." And Thad's response below it, "It just means you know what you want." She looked at the screen. She looked at me. The composure held for 2 more seconds. Then it came down. "How long have you had this?" 2 weeks. "Aaron, I'm going to ask you one time to tell me the truth. Not because it changes the outcome. It won't. But I want to know whether you're capable of it." She sat down across from me and she told me. 7 months. She said it started without her fully realizing it had started, which is the story people tell themselves. She said she'd been unhappy in ways she didn't know how to explain, which may have been true. She said she never wanted it to end this way. I sat there and listened and experienced the specific exhaustion of having the story confirmed by the person who made you read it in their emails first. I called Thad the following morning. He was ready for it. His voice was controlled in the way of a man who has managed situations before. He said he wanted to talk man to man. He said he took responsibility for his part. He said he cared about my wife and didn't want to see her hurt. She's going to lose her job, I said. A pause. What does that mean? It means that over the course of this, she forwarded confidential client communications from her firm to your business email. Competitive research. Market analysis her firm was producing for a client who turns out to be in direct competition with one of your development bids. I let that settle. When her managing partners find out, and they will find out, her position won't survive it. His voice dropped. You're bluffing. You charged 41 hotel room nights to Whitmore Development in the last 14 months, Thad. I have the expense reports. I have your assistant's booking confirmations. I have the dates cross-referenced against every story you and my wife told your respective spouses. I paused. Joan has the bank records. She's filing Monday. The silence on the line lasted long enough that I checked whether the call had dropped. Then, what do you want? I want you to understand that other people are real, I said. I want you to sit with what it costs when you treat people's lives like a resource you can draw on and walk away from. And then I want you to call your attorney, because Joan isn't waiting. I hung up. Joan filed Monday. By Wednesday, a letter had gone from her attorney to the institutional investors. Standard language, notification of divorce proceedings, disclosure that certain business expenses would be subject to discovery. Completely legal, entirely accurate. The effect was not standard. The commercial property group put their fourth development with Thad on hold pending review. The regional bank asked for a project account audit. His Nashville partner, upon receiving documentation of the first situation from Joan's attorney, ended their working relationship in a letter that was polite in the way that well-crafted legal language is polite when it needs to be permanent. Thad Orwell spent October learning what happens when a methodical person has been working against you since June. My wife's firm called her in during the last week of October. One of their clients had flagged a discrepancy. Certain competitive intelligence had apparently reached a rival's project timeline. The trail wasn't hard to follow once someone started following it. The market analysis she'd forwarded to Thad in March had helped his firm place a bid that her own client had expected to win. She was let go that afternoon. She left a voicemail at the number I was using at Seth's place. Her voice was quiet and stripped down to something I hadn't heard in it before, something that might have been genuine. She said she was sorry. She said she didn't understand how it had gotten so far from where it started. She said she hoped that someday I'd be able to understand that she hadn't meant for any of this. I listened to it once. I didn't call back. There was nothing left to say that the previous 2 months hadn't already said more clearly. Joan's divorce was finalized the following spring. She got what she'd told me she wanted from the beginning. Half the marital assets, legal fees, and the Nashville settlement amount factored into the asset calculation, because her attorney was thorough in the way that Joan herself was thorough. She sent me a short email in April. 4 sentences. She said she felt free for the first time in years. She said working with me had reminded her that honesty was still a viable approach. She ended it. The best thing we did was refuse to be quiet. I sold the house in February. 12 years of equity, a deck I'd built myself, the kitchen my wife had insisted on renovating twice. I sold it and bought a smaller place in Mount Lookout. 2 bedrooms, a yard just big enough, hardwood floors that needed refinishing. I spent a Saturday afternoon painting the kitchen a dark slate blue that I'd wanted for years and that had always been vetoed. It sounds like a small thing. It wasn't. My firm landed a major contract that spring, bridge inspection work on a downtown rehabilitation project, the biggest single job we'd ever taken on. My brother Seth drove over when we got the news and brought good beer, and we sat on the tailgate of my truck in the parking lot as the afternoon went sideways into evening, and didn't feel the need to say much of anything. People have asked me since then whether I went too far, whether involving Joan, whether going to the investors, whether letting all of it unravel publicly instead of quietly, whether that was more than the situation required. I understand the question. I understand it comes from people who haven't read their own name in someone else's private messages and found it described as a limitation, who haven't sat in a parking garage 2 hours from home trying to absorb the fact that the life they thought they were living had a different version running underneath it the whole time, who haven't learned that the man involved had done the same thing twice before and paid his way clear and kept going, because no one made enough noise to slow him down. I didn't set out to ruin anyone. I set out to make sure the damage was proportionate to what had actually happened. Thad Orwell had managed 2 previous situations by depending on other people's preference for quiet. Joan had stayed silent for 3 months because silence felt safer. I was the next person they both expected to absorb it and disappear. I didn't disappear, I just took my time. I'm 47 now. The firm is doing well. I have a house I chose for myself, work I've always been proud of, and a slowly returning sense that the man who shows up in the mirror in the morning can be trusted. That might sound modest. After the year I had, it doesn't feel modest at all. It feels like the specific kind of solid that only comes from being tested and deciding to hold. Some things you build. Some things you discover were never as stable as they looked. The difference in the end is knowing which is which, and having the patience to figure out exactly what you're working with before you decide what to do next.